There are moments in life that change you forever. Moments that creep up so silently, so effortlessly, that you don't even realize what's happening until it's already too late. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to cross that line. Never. Not in a million years. I was a wife, a mother, a woman who played by the rules. But life has a cruel way of exposing the cracks you never knew existed. And when the loneliness becomes unbearable, when the silence in your own home starts to suffocate you, you start searching for air, for warmth, for anything that reminds you you're still alive. It's been 2 years since that day. 2 years since everything changed. And, even now, I can still feel it. The way my hands trembled. The way my heart pounded so violently I thought it would break free from my chest. The way my breath caught in my throat when I realized I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. I wish I could tell you this story has a simple explanation. That it was just a moment of weakness. A mistake made in the heat of passion. But it's not that simple. No, this story is far more complicated than that. Because this was never supposed to happen. You think you know who you are. You think you understand the limits of your own morality. But all it takes is one moment, one perfectly placed temptation to shatter everything you thought was true. And that's what happened to me. Before I tell you everything, before I pull you into this story the way it pulled me in, I need you to understand something. I didn't go looking for this. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to destroy my life. It started with something small. Harmless. Something that didn't even register as dangerous. But the thing about temptation? It never feels like a threat until it's already too late. And now, I have to live with the consequences. This is not a story I ever imagined telling. But it's the truth. It's my truth. And by the time I'm done, you'll understand why some mistakes can never be undone. Before I begin, if you're someone who craves raw, real, and shocking true stories of infidelity, make sure to subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because trust me, this is one you won't forget. If you saw my life from the outside, you'd think I had everything. A beautiful home in a quiet neighborhood. A successful husband. 2 wonderful children. A life that looked perfect. But that's the thing about appearances, they lie. My husband, Daniel, he was everything a woman should want. Strong. Reliable. A good provider. The kind of man who never forgot to pay the bills, who never missed a meeting, who always had a plan. But somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing me. I don't know when it happened exactly. Maybe it was after the kids were born, when our lives started revolving around schedules and responsibilities instead of late-night conversations and stolen kisses. Maybe it was when his career took off and his mind became consumed with numbers and deadlines instead of love notes and warm touches. Maybe it happened so slowly that neither of us even noticed, until one day, we woke up next to each other and realized we had become strangers. We were the kind of couple that still took pictures together at family gatherings. That still said, "I love you," before bed, like it was a ritual, empty words floating in the silence of our bedroom. He was never cruel, never unkind. But he was absent. Even when he was home, his mind was always somewhere else. In his emails, in his phone, in the spaces between us where love used to live. And me? I became invisible. I would lie awake at night, listening to him breathe beside me, listening to the sound of the clock ticking on the wall, feeling the cold sheets between us, a barrier of silence that had grown so thick I wasn't sure if I could ever break through it. I would turn toward him sometimes, reach out just a little, but I always stopped myself. Because what was the point? He had already drifted too far away. Mornings were the worst. I would wake up early, make breakfast, set the table, just hoping that today would be different. That someone would look up. That someone would notice me. But it was always the same. My husband scrolling through his phone between sips of coffee. My daughter, too young to understand the loneliness that clung to me, chatting away about cartoons. And Jacob, my son. Quiet. Observant. The only one who ever really seemed to see me. Jacob was 16. At that age where boys start to pull away from their mothers, where they become distant, distracted, too caught up in their own world to care about yours. But he wasn't like that. He still talked to me. He still laughed at my jokes. He still noticed things. Like how tired I was. How I forced a smile when his father walked past me without a glance. How I lingered at the kitchen sink long after breakfast was over, staring at nothing, lost in my own thoughts. Sometimes he would say little things that made me pause. "You okay, Mom? You seem kinda sad lately. You don't have to pretend with me, you know." And I would always brush it off. Because what could I say? That I felt empty? That I was drowning in a life I had chosen, in a marriage that felt more like a business arrangement than a love story? That sometimes I went entire days without feeling the warmth of another person's touch? I couldn't say those things. So I smiled. I told him I was fine. I kept going. Because that's what you do when you're a wife. A mother. A woman who made vows she's supposed to keep. But there were moments, small, insignificant moments, that should have been nothing. That meant nothing. And yet, they stayed with me. A fleeting glance across the dinner table. A touch that lingered just a second too long when he handed me a plate. The way his eyes softened when I laughed, like he hadn't seen me happy in a long time. They were moments I should have ignored. Moments I should have buried. Moments that, at the time, felt like nothing. But nothing has a way of becoming something when you're starving. It was supposed to be a normal day. Just a family trip to the beach. Nothing unusual, nothing different. The kind of day we used to have all the time before life got too busy, before everything became routine. Daniel had suggested it, probably out of obligation more than anything else. He was always working, always somewhere else in his mind, but every now and then, he'd remember to play the role of the family man. So, we packed up the car, threw in some snacks, towels, sunscreen. The sun was high, the sky was clear, the kind of day that made you forget, for a little while, that anything was missing. Jacob was the one who sat next to me in the car. My daughter, giggling in the back seat, humming to some song on the radio. Daniel? He was driving, one hand on the wheel, the other scrolling through emails, half present, half gone. Jacob was in a good mood that day. Playful. His usual quiet self, but different. Lighter. Maybe it was the sun or the ocean air, or maybe it was just one of those rare days where everything felt okay. He nudged me at one point, making some joke about my terrible choice in sunglasses. I laughed, genuinely laughed, and it was such a strange feeling that moment. It had been a long time since I had laughed like that. When we got to the beach, everything felt easy. The kids ran ahead, the sand warm beneath our feet, the waves rolling in, washing everything clean. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt part of something. A family. Even Daniel, distracted as he was, had moments where he seemed to let go, to just be there. And then, there was a moment. Just a second. Just a nothing moment that should have faded as soon as it happened. I was sitting on the sand, the sun warming my skin, my fingers running through the grains absent-mindedly. Jacob had been in the water, laughing, splashing around with his sister. And then, at some point, he came over to where I was sitting. Just plopped down next to me, his skin glistening with salt water, his hair dripping onto his shoulders. He stretched out on the towel, arms behind his head, breathing deep, content. And then, he reached for my hand. It was nothing, really. Just a small gesture. His fingers brushing against mine as he reached for something near me. But it was the way it happened. The way his touch lingered for half a second too long. The way my breath hitched just barely, just enough for me to notice. The way he didn't move away as quickly as he should have. It was nothing. But nothing is a way of settling into your bones, of staying there, waiting. I told myself I imagined it. That the heat, the sun, the exhaustion was making me see things that weren't there. But then he looked at me. Just for a moment. Just long enough for something to pass between us. Something silent. Something unspoken. Something that made my stomach twist, made my heart pound just a little harder than it should have. And then it was gone. Just like that. He turned away, reached for his water bottle, laughed at something his sister said. And I was left there, staring at my own hands, trying to shake off the feeling, the heat that had nothing to do with the sun. No, that was nothing. I'm imagining things. Right? It should have ended there. That moment on the beach, it should have meant nothing. It should have disappeared, melted away like footprints in the sand, washed clean by the tide. But it didn't. I carried it with me. That fleeting touch. That glance. That feeling. I carried it home, tucked it away in the quiet corners of my mind, but it refused to stay buried. It lingered. It followed me. It whispered to me when I was alone. And I hated myself for it. Why did it feel different? Why did it stay with me the way it did? Was I just lonely? Was my mind playing tricks on me? Or was there something there, something real, something dangerous? I told myself it was nothing. I forced myself to believe it. But then, I started noticing things. Jacob had always been protective of me. Always the one who noticed when I was tired, when I was sad, when something wasn't quite right. But now it felt different. I caught him watching me at dinner in the car when I was lost in thought. Not in an obvious way, not in a way that anyone else would notice. But I noticed. It was the way his eyes lingered a second too long, the way his posture shifted when Daniel was around, the way his expression softened when I laughed. And then, there were the small things. The way he stood closer than before. The way his hand would brush against mine when we passed in the hallway. The way he leaned in when I spoke, as if my words were the only thing that mattered. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was all in my head. But then, there were the dreams. The first time, I woke up breathless, my body trembling, my skin flushed with heat I didn't understand. It was just a dream, I told myself. Dreams don't mean anything. But this one felt too real. A touch, warm and familiar. A whisper against my skin. A feeling of being wanted, of being seen, of being something more than invisible. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, my throat dry, my body aching with something I refused to name. I looked over at Daniel, his back turned to me, his breathing slow and steady in sleep. And for a moment I hated him. Hated him for making me feel this way. For making me crave something I shouldn't. I closed my eyes, tried to shake it off. But the dream stayed with me, clung to my skin like the remnants of a fever. The way his hands had felt. The way my body had responded. The way I had wanted it. I couldn't let this happen. I couldn't let my mind go there. But the more I tried to push it away, the more it followed me. Every time Jacob looked at me. Every time he smiled. Every time his fingers brushed against mine. It was like a fire had been lit inside me, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't put it out. This wasn't nothing. It was becoming something. And I didn't know how to stop it. I should have stopped it. Whatever this was, this shift, this thing growing between us, I should have put an end to it before it had the chance to become real. But the truth? I didn't want to. It was subtle at first. Small things. Things that could be explained away, dismissed, ignored if I tried hard enough. A hug that lingered just a second too long. Not enough for anyone to notice, not even enough for either of us to acknowledge, but enough for me to feel it. Enough for my breath to catch, for my heart to stutter, for my skin to remember his warmth long after he pulled away. Then, there were the nights. Daniel worked late, long hours, endless meetings, always an excuse. The house would be quiet, the kids in their rooms, and somehow, Jacob and I would always find ourselves in the kitchen at the same time. Him, grabbing a glass of water. Me, pretending I wasn't waiting for him to walk in. It started as nothing. Just late-night conversations. Small, harmless moments. Sitting across from each other at the table, the glow of the stove light casting shadows on the walls. Talking about everything and nothing. About school, about life, about the things he was thinking, the things I was feeling. And then, one night, something changed. I don't even remember how we got there, what words led us down that path, but suddenly, I was telling him things I had never said out loud before. That I felt alone. That I felt forgotten. That sometimes I looked in the mirror and didn't even recognize myself anymore. And he listened. Really listened. Not the way Daniel did, half distracted, nodding at the right moments, but never really hearing me. No. Jacob looked at me like my words mattered. like I mattered. And then, he said something that shook me to my core. He doesn't see you, does he? The air between us felt different after that. Tighter. Charged. Like we had crossed some invisible line, one we could never uncross. Because he was right. Daniel didn't see me. But Jacob did. And that realization settled in my chest, warm and dangerous, curling around my ribs like something I didn't want to let go of. I told myself it was innocent. That he was just being kind. That this, whatever it was just the result of loneliness, of too many years spent feeling unwanted. That it wasn't about him. It wasn't about me. It was just the circumstances. Just a connection I had been craving, nothing more. He's the only one who listens. That's all this is. Right? But then, there were the moments that couldn't be explained away. Like the way his hand would brush against mine when he passed me in the kitchen. The way he stood too close when we talked, his presence filling the space between us like something tangible, something undeniable. The way my breath caught whenever he said my name, just my name, like it was something worth savoring. And then, the dinner table. Daniel was home that night. A rare occurrence, the four of us sitting at the table, the sounds of silverware clinking against plates, my daughter talking about her day, Daniel half listening, his phone never more than an inch away from his hand. It was normal. Ordinary. But I wasn't paying attention to any of it. I was aware of one thing. One presence. One person. Jacob was sitting next to me. Close. Too close. And beneath the table, where no one else could see, I felt it. His hand. His fingers searching, reaching. Brushing against mine. Holding. Waiting. I should have pulled away. I should have ended it. But I didn't. I let it happen. I let the moment stretch. I let myself feel it, the warmth of his skin, the slow, deliberate way his fingers curled around mine. A secret. A sin. A line I should never have crossed. And then, I squeezed back. There are nights that change everything. Nights that start like any other, but end with a line so violently crossed that there's no going back. This was one of those nights. The storm had rolled in slowly. The kind that creeps up on you, low rumbles in the distance, the scent of rain thick in the air before the first drop ever touches the ground. By the time night fell, the sky was black, the wind rattling the windows, the house swallowed in darkness when the power flickered out. Daniel had gone to bed early. He never liked storms. They made him restless, agitated. He'd muttered something about having an early meeting, kissed my cheek out of habit, and disappeared upstairs. My daughter was already asleep, tucked in safely, oblivious to the storm outside. And then there was Jacob. I found him in the living room, stretched out on the couch, staring at the ceiling like he was lost in thought. The only light came from the flashes of lightning through the window, brief bursts illuminating his face, casting shadows I couldn't read. I don't know why I sat down next to him. Maybe it was the darkness. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the way my heart had been pulling me toward him for weeks, months, longer than I was willing to admit. But I did. I sat there, my hands in my lap, staring straight ahead, pretending I didn't feel the heat of him next to me. And then, he spoke. "You're not happy, are you?" I should have lied. I should have said, "Of course I am." I should have laughed it off, told him not to be ridiculous. But I couldn't. I couldn't force the words past my lips. Because we both knew they weren't true. I turned my head, just slightly, just enough to meet his gaze in the dark. His eyes were searching, full of something I didn't want to name. Something dangerous. Something that made my pulse stutter and my breath catch in my throat. "Jacob," I started, but I didn't know what came next. What I was supposed to say. What I was supposed to do. Because suddenly, everything felt too close. Too real. The air between us was thick, electric, humming with something unspoken. And then, he touched me. It was nothing at first. Just the back of his fingers brushing against mine. A simple touch. A meaningless touch. But it wasn't meaningless. It was everything. I should have pulled away. I should have left the room, gone upstairs, climbed into bed next to my husband, forced myself to pretend this wasn't happening. But I didn't move. I couldn't move. His fingers slid over mine, slowly, carefully, testing. My breath hitched. My heartbeat was deafening in my ears. The storm raged outside, the wind howling against the windows, but inside, everything was still. Everything was waiting. And then, he leaned in. It was slow, hesitant. His breath warm against my skin, his lips hovering just close enough that I could feel them, but not yet taste them. I was frozen, caught between every voice in my head screaming at me to stop, to run, to end this now, and the aching, desperate part of me that had been starving for this very moment. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. A plea. A warning. And I should have. God, I should have. But I didn't. I turned my face toward him, closing the last inches between us. And then, his mouth was on mine. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't soft. It was raw, desperate, years of loneliness and longing crashing together in a kiss that stole the breath from my lungs. His hands cupped my face, his fingers threading into my hair, pulling me closer, deeper, as if he could feel how broken I was and was trying to put me back together. I lost myself. Completely. Utterly. In the way his lips moved against mine, in the way his body pressed against me, solid and warm and real in a way that nothing else had been in so long. I clung to him, drinking him in, drowning in the feeling of finally being wanted. And then I wrenched back, gasping for air, my hands flying to my lips as if I could erase what had just happened. My heart was pounding, my vision spinning, everything inside me screaming that I had just made the worst mistake of my life. Jacob was staring at me, his breath uneven, his expression unreadable. "Mom," he started, but I couldn't let him finish. I couldn't hear whatever he was about to say, because if I did, I knew I would break. I scrambled to my feet, shaking, unsteady. I have to go," I choked out. And then, before I could see the look in his eyes, before I could give myself the chance to change my mind, I turned and fled. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I locked myself in my bedroom, pressed my back against the door, wrapped my arms around myself like I could somehow hold everything together. But I couldn't. My body was still trembling, my skin still burning where he had touched me, my lips still tingling with the ghost of that kiss. I crossed a line I swore I would never cross. And now, I could never go back. But the worst part? The part one couldn't let myself say out loud? I wasn't sure if I even wanted to. I told myself I would fix it, that I would make things normal again, that this was just a moment of madness, a slip, a mistake. I told myself that if I just acted like nothing happened, then maybe, it would fade away. But that was a lie. Because the moment I walked downstairs the next morning, the moment I saw him sitting there at the kitchen table, everything crashed down all over again. He looked up when I entered. Our eyes met. And just like that, it was there again. The tension. The heat. The thing neither of us could take back. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His expression was enough. A flicker of something unreadable. Something dark. Something that made my stomach twist. I forced myself to move, to act normal. I went to the coffee pot, poured a cup, focused on the sound of liquid filling the mug like it was the most important thing in the world. But I could feel him watching me. I could feel the air between us, charged, electric, dangerous. Then, Daniel walked in. And just like that, the world snapped back into place. Or at least, it was supposed to. "Morning," he muttered, not even looking at me, already scrolling through his phone. Same as always. Same as every morning before. But for the first time, it didn't feel the same. Because for the first time, I noticed the way Jacob stiffened in his chair. The way his eyes flickered toward his father. The way his jaw tightened, the muscles in his arms flexing ever so slightly, like he was bracing for something. I wasn't the only one who had changed. Jacob was different now. The way he looked at me. The way he moved around me. The way he lingered just a second too long when he passed by. He wasn't avoiding me, like I had expected. No, it was worse than that. He was watching me. Like he was waiting. Like he was daring me to acknowledge what we had done. I avoided him. I had to. Every moment alone with him felt dangerous, like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing one wrong step would send me plummeting. I stopped sitting next to him at dinner. Stopped meeting his eyes when we spoke. Stopped lingering in the same room for too long. But none of it mattered. Because he was always there. Always watching. Always waiting. And then, little by little, he started pushing. It was subtle at first. A hand resting on the small of my back when he passed by. A touch that lasted a fraction of a second longer than it should have. A glance across the room, sharp, unreadable. A tension so thick it wrapped around me like a vice, squeezing, suffocating. And then there were the moments that made my breath catch in my throat. The way he stood too close whenever Daniel was around, like he was staking a claim. The way his gaze darkened when my husband kissed my cheek before leaving for work. The way he tensed when Daniel put his arm around me, his fingers curling into fists like he had to physically restrain himself. He was different now. More protective. More territorial. And I should have stopped it. I should have ended it. But every time I tried, every time I convinced myself to set things right, he would do something small, something quiet, that made my resolve shatter into pieces. A whisper when he passed me in the hallway. "You don't have to pretend with me." A brush of fingers when he handed me a plate at dinner, his thumb tracing over my skin, so quick, so careful, that no one else noticed, but I did. God, I did. A look. Just a look. But one that held 1,000 things we could never say out loud. This wasn't going away. It was growing, spreading, taking root in the spaces between us, in the silence, in the stolen glances, and the unsaid words. And I was losing control. There comes a moment after you've done something unforgivable when the weight of it truly settles on you. Not in the heat of passion, not in the immediate aftermath, but later, when the world slows down, when the adrenaline fades, when you're left alone with nothing but the echo of your own thoughts. That moment came for me in the middle of the night. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the emptiness of the sheets beside me. Daniel was asleep, his breathing slow, steady, completely unaware of the storm raging inside of me. I turned onto my side, curling in on myself, wrapping my arms around my body as if I could physically hold my shame together. My skin felt different. My lips felt different. Like they weren't mine anymore. Like they had been branded with something I could never scrub away. What have I done? I tried to tell myself it was a mistake. A lapse in judgment. A moment of weakness. But deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't just one moment. It was all of it. The glances. The lingering touches. The way I let myself sink into something I should have run from the second I felt it creeping in. I had let it grow. Let it fester. And now I was drowning in it. Am I a monster? Or was I just desperate to feel something? I wanted to believe it was the latter. That it wasn't about him, but about me. About the years of loneliness, the emptiness of a marriage that had become nothing but routine, the hunger for warmth, for connection, for something real. I wanted to believe that this had been about needing to be seen, to be touched, to be reminded that I was still alive. But that didn't make it right. That didn't change the fact that I had crossed a line I could never uncross. I turned my face into the pillow, squeezing my eyes shut, willing myself to sleep. But sleep didn't come. Only memories. Only the ghost of his lips on mine, the warmth of his breath, the way his hands had held me like I was something precious, something worth holding onto. I didn't hate it. I should have. I should have been repulsed, sickened, disgusted with myself. But I wasn't. And that was the worst part. I wanted to pretend I could just erase it. That if I ignored it, buried it deep enough, it would disappear. But I knew better. I knew the way secrets worked. They don't vanish. They don't dissolve. They stay. They fester. They rot you from the inside out. And this was a secret I could never tell a soul. I could never say it out loud. Never confess it. Never let it slip. Because saying it would make it real. And if it was real, if I let myself fully admit what I had done, then I would have to face the truth. That I had ruined everything. That I had become something I never thought I could be. And that there was no turning back. I know what you're thinking. I know how this sounds. I know how it looks. I can hear the judgment in your silence, feel the weight of what I've just told you pressing against the air between us. And believe me, I've judged myself far worse than you ever could. I wish I could take it back. I wish I could go back to before, to the version of me who still believed she was safe from something like this. The woman who thought she knew herself, who thought she would never, could never. But I can't. I lived it. I did it. And no matter how much I want to undo it, there is no undoing. So tell me, do you think loneliness can drive a person to madness? Do you think the absence of love, of warmth, of being truly seen can break someone piece by piece until they don't recognize themselves anymore? Would you judge me? Or do you understand? I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect understanding. But maybe someone out there has felt this too. Maybe someone knows what it's like to stare into the mirror and not recognize the person looking back. To feel the ache of something missing, something gone, something you can't name but crave so desperately it makes you do things you never thought you were capable of. Maybe you've been here, standing on the edge of something you can't explain, something you can't stop. Or maybe you've already fallen. Tell me what you think. Tell me if you've ever felt this kind of emptiness. Tell me if you've ever been so desperate for something, anything, that you let yourself be pulled into the dark. Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more real, raw stories like this one, subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga. Because trust me, there's always another story. Loneliness is a powerful thing. It sneaks up on you, fills the empty spaces in ways you never expect, and before you know it, you're lost. And some things can never be undone.